Bonsoir. Is there anyone courageous enough to be meditating in Shavasana back there? The rule that so the rule for using Shavasana in conditions like this where people are frequently succumbing to coarse dullness and falling asleep and starting to snore is that if you believe that you are up to doing Shavasana, meaning that you think that you have enough clarity to meditate in that position, then don't go off to a corner all by yourself. But meditate within reach of someone so that if you do succumb to coarse dullness, that you can be rescued by a simple touch and maybe a shake. So, wow, it's blazing. Let's do a simple meditation that we'll go back again to the grounding, very soothing meditation of Asanga's mindfulness of breathing. Are you okay? Okay. Want to move over here? We're back there. Begin by settling the body in its natural state. This is the state of relaxed ease, stillness and alertness. When the body is free of tension. And the mind is free of grasping to a conceptualized body. So allow everything that you know about the body come by the way of bare sensations. The advice of many masters, including Mingyur Rinpoche, is that it is very important that wherever your attention goes, it goes because of your intention. So you continually practice to direct attention with intention. And so the advice says that if some distraction becomes so overwhelming that you can't ignore it, then with intention, direct your attention to it so that your attention isn't distracted to it. You are voluntarily giving your attention. So in the case of very loud tractor noises right outside, we can direct our attention to it in the moments that it is overwhelming our attention. And if heat just becomes such a compelling distraction, let your attention go to it with intention and examine the tactile sensation of the heat element, or the fire element, that is. And notice these tactile sensations of heat with bare intention. Meaning there is no conceptual overlay, no defining it, just simple tactile sensation. And does the experience of the heat change when you give it only bare attention? And especially if you release all conceptual grasping to an image of a body that this is my body, what remains is only tactile sensations, as if they are arising in space. Another of the elements is the earth element. This is the tactile sensation of solidity and firmness. So allow your attention to become aware of any tension, any feelings of constriction. And wherever you discover those, let your breath be drawn to that tension as if magnetically. And then release it on the exhalation into space. Another of the family of tactile sensations is the water element. You might feel perspiration, liquid on your skin. Again, know that with bare attention. So maintain this non-conceptual body of only tactile sensations and enjoy the release that leads to the natural state of the body. And upon this deep relaxation, balanced with the clarity that you begin the meditation with, discover the natural state of speech. Effortless silence. And a contentment with that silence. And another aspect of the natural state of speech is giving up all control of the breath. Simply allow the body to breathe itself. Without preferring that this breath be different. And then settle the mind in its natural state. Relaxed, still, and clear. Luminous and spacious. And allow this luminous and spacious awareness to fill your entire body and simply to become aware of tactile sensations, of the earth element, the water element, fire element, and air element, wherever they occur in the body. These are sensations of solidity and firmness, of liquid and flowing, of heat and cold, and of movement. All of these are the full range of sensations that can be felt with the tactile sensation, or the sense, the primary consciousness of tactile sensations. And as your awareness fills your body, open and receptive to sensations wherever they occur, sensations of movement become very noticeable. So take special interest now in sensations of the breath that change. Sensations in the body that change as the breath enters and leaves your body. Remain continuously engaged with the sensations of the breath. Wherever they occur. And without focusing on a particular place, you may discover sensations in surprising places. Asanga tells us to notice also as a tactile sensation fluctuations of prana that occur with the in and the out breath. So as you exhale, you may notice a deepening of your relaxation. This practice is very soothing, very relaxing. With no effort required of attention, focused on a particular place. Another easily noticed pranic effect is a feeling of invigoration that occurs with the inhalation. there is a subtle but very noticeable deepening of relaxation with each exhalation. And a subtle but noticeable invigoration with each inhalation. So with this simple practice of the breath, you can find this very relaxed, very clear state of awareness. To promote stability, add intention to the beginning of each exhalation. In that brief pause before the exhalation, simply, wordlessly and instantly, recall your intention to remain continuously engaged with the sensations through the full course of the exhalation. And because the power of introspection is as important as mindfulness for developing stability, add a glance of introspection at the pause after the exhalation. Without losing your engagement with the sensations of the breath. Simply know whether excitation or laxity are present or are on the verge of becoming present. We'll go into questions very quickly. But just before we do, and I promise that tonight we will be out of here earlier than we were last night, even if my answers have to be much shorter. But first of all, I just want to wrap up the 4 modes of mindfulness of Düdjom Lingpa. So the first 2 modes of mindfulness, single-pointed mindfulness and manifest mindfulness, really take us all the way through the 9 levels of Shamatha, where you develop effortless single-pointedness. So what is it that's left to do after that? And why is that only the first 2 of 4 modes of mindfulness? The other 2 modes of mindfulness, which are number 3, the absence of mindfulness, and number 4, self-illuminating mindfulness, take you back to the substrate and then to substrate consciousness. And so these are called, number 3 is called absence of mindfulness, because at this point there are no appearances. So you will find this described in the table that was handed out earlier today. It was just available this morning. So it is called the absence of mindfulness because mindfulness requires an object. And in the absence of all appearances, there is an absence of mindfulness. So this is what happens after level 9, you could say, in the 9 stages of Shamatha, that all appearances basically disappear because all of the 5 senses, the 5 primary consciousnesses of the senses, are absorbed into the mind, into substrate. And so there is no sensory input at all at that stage. So this corresponds to level 5, the absence of mindfulness. So you are going back to substrate, that very common experience where you spend 6 hours each day in deep dreamless sleep. But now this is a very different experience of substrate. Because what characterizes substrate as we know it through most of our life, during deep dreamless sleep, and when we faint or are under a general anesthetic, or during the dark near attainment at death, what happens is unconsciousness, or we lose awareness entirely. So now when we attain the substrate in level 3, there is a luminosity, not a luminosity, but a knowing. So we are no longer unaware when we go back through this experience of substrate. Otherwise, what would be the big importance of this as a stage of Shamatha? So it may be, and I am still waiting to get definitive answers on this, but it could be that, and it appears logical to me, that when you attain this level of Shamatha, that you become aware you remain lucid in deep dreamless sleep. And so that would be quite an extraordinary experience, to be really full-time, to remain lucid 24 hours a day. Because by this point you probably will have achieved very common lucidity in the dream state, and then to be dreaming or to be lucid also in deep dreamless sleep. And then by the practice of simultaneous stillness and motion in the second mode of mindfulness, and the first mode also, to achieve that single pointedness, you will have achieved lucidity in the waking state. So you are now, it could be anyway, that when you achieve this level of shamatha, you are lucid full time. There is no more unawareness. I'm waiting to have further debate on that. But then the experience when you rest in the absence of mindfulness and substrate then leads to, in this particular state, of the two qualities of consciousness, which is consciousness being luminous and knowing. Now you could say there is only the knowing quality of consciousness. So it knows, but there are no appearances. So it knows itself, that basically this knowing is an absence of unawareness. And then there is a further development with level 4, and this probably happens quite quickly, that out of this knowing substrate, the vacuity of substrate, then the luminous quality of mind emerges, just as it does every morning when you wake up or you begin dreaming. The luminous nature becomes manifest as substrate consciousness. But now in this state also there are no appearances. So now the mind is luminous and knowing, and the qualities that fill awareness are simply luminosity, non-conceptuality. So you could say the non-conceptuality is the vacuity of substrate. And so you have the luminosity, non-conceptuality, and then bliss is the third component. So both of these, simply resting in non-conceptuality and luminosity, the essential nature of the relative mind, leads to the experience of bliss. And this bliss, as I mentioned briefly yesterday, I think it was, is correlated with that mental and physical pliancy of the achievement of shamatha. This is one of its great qualities. And unfortunately, we don't have time to go through all these scriptural citations of that tonight. But one of the interesting experiences when you achieve shamatha, Arya Sangha says, as quoted by Lama Tsongkhapa, that at first the bliss that you attain when you achieve shamatha, so the bliss when you first attain the fourth mode of mindfulness, is so overwhelming that it is incapacitating. You can't do anything with it. All you want to do is to rest in this bliss. And all of the masters always warn about the danger of becoming attached to this state of non-conceptuality, luminosity, and bliss. And so one of the ways that this warning is given is by, in the pointing out instructions of the great Dzogchen and Mahamudra masters, pointing out the distinction between this substrate consciousness, the non-conceptuality, luminosity, and bliss of substrate consciousness, which is the essential nature of the relative mind, and the absolute nature of the mind of pristine awareness or primordial consciousness. So it's not far away, but there are very important distinctions, and we'll go into that. And so if your teacher gives you, as part of the advice of training in Shamatha, this distinction between the achievement of Shamatha and the achievement of primordial consciousness, then you are less likely to become attached to the non-conceptuality, luminosity, and bliss, and then just rest in that or go off into jhana practice, as was the custom at the time of the Buddha. So I just wanted to wrap that up. There really aren't any particular practices to do that lead you from the second mode of mindfulness to the third mode of mindfulness. This is just the natural progression that happens after you achieve effortless single-pointedness. The images or appearances just stop occurring, stop arising, and then you enter substrate and then substrate consciousness, and then achieve the mental and physical pliancy of Shamatha. But I wanted to wrap that up. I'm sorry, I had actually thought, I think we are running out of time for what I was hoping to do during this retreat, and there is still very, very important things to come. So one of the practices that I had hoped to teach, and actually as one of these evening sessions, but we just don't really have time in the evening to go into a whole new practice, is called the practice of merging mind with space. And this is in some presentations of Padmasambhava's Shamatha practice, this would be the culminating practice, that you go through settling the mind in its natural state in the earlier phases of Shamatha, and then you end up merging mind with space. And really this is just where you are resting, very much like our practice of awareness that we did yesterday. You are just resting the mind with no appearances, but you are now consciously knowing the luminosity and spaciousness of your awareness. So this is another exhilarating practice, but it's a little bit off target for where I want to keep us focused on this retreat, so we won't go into that. But just so that you know it's there if you're interested in it, this is a common teaching of Alan Wallace, and you can also find this in the book that was translated by Alan Wallace, Gyatro Rinpoche's teachings on the text Natural Liberation of Padmasambhava. I think that's enough. And, the reason I wanted to wrap that up tonight was so that tomorrow we can begin a new subject freshly. So tomorrow we will begin the fusion of Shamatha and Vipassana. And this is, again, a very exhilarating and distinct approach of Dzogchen and Mahamudra. And so It's not that we are going to leave our practice of simultaneous and stillness and motion behind. For the rest of the retreat, we will be doing that practice as our meditation practice. But now we are going to be adding important elements of vipassana. So remember that in the second type of mindfulness, of shamatha, that that Mahasiddha Maitripa mentioned, that the shamatha focused on conceptualization. He said that you, by resting without preferring virtue over non-virtuous thoughts, whether your thoughts are virtuous or non-virtuous, you rest in this stillness, and then you come to know the nature of the thoughts. So, and then he said in the last lines of that citation that you have, that you also become aware then, as you continue to rest, knowing the nature of appearances, that you come to know the nature of the awareness that knows these appearances as well. And so he's clearly talking about a fusion of shamatha and vipassana practice there. But he's describing it as a shamatha practice. And so this is the genius of this system, I think, in that while you're doing shamatha practice and developing the stability and vividness, the single-pointedness and vividness of shamatha, the vipassana conclusions are inescapable. And we'll go into that in more detail tomorrow. But it is a very elegant system for doing vipassana practice empirically, with observation. And there will be I will be introducing you to a framework of the view of the ultimate nature of the mind in Dzogchen practice. But really the investigation is empirical. So it is all based on what you can observe. And this is the importance of shamatha then, because now, as Lama Alan says, you have developed the contemplative technology. So it's just like having a Hubble telescope in space. Now you can examine vast reaches of space that were never visible before. And so now we have developed this extraordinary mode of observation. And now with that, getting down to the essential nature of the mind with shamatha, now this is the time to examine the nature of this essential mind. And that's why then the progress through vipassana happens very quickly, it's said, in this approach, after you achieve shamatha. So, enough of that for tonight, and we will go now to questions. Okay. Can you tell me the total number so I have a budget of time? Here's one. Looks like a deck of cards over there.
Infinite number.
Oh.
14, 15.
Okay. It's good to know. I'll set a timer. I'll start with this one. You've given us many fascinating explanations about what and how things are. Thank you for that. By any chance, would you happen to know why? Oh, yeah. A very interesting question. Oh, boy. I'm going to just keep this very brief. So what and how are very important. And you can observe those empirically. And this really is something that science is very good at. What's happening? How is it happening? What are the causes and conditions? How do all of these causes and conditions create an interdependent phenomena? But the question that science can't answer is the question that this person has asked, is why? So why is there anything rather than nothing, for instance? And then a question also, while you're resting in simultaneous stillness and motion, these appearances arise. So you see what they are, you see these appearances, but why these appearances right now? Why? I was working on a book, a second book, a couple of years ago, and the working title of it was Why This Now? Because that is the question that this comes from an argument with Daniel Dennett, who's a cognitive philosopher, who's the arch or the leading materialist, one of the leading figures of materialist cognitive science. And so the question basically that he proposed, what I think is a very good one. He said, any explanation of appearances in the mind basically has to be able to answer the question, why is this appearance arising now? Interesting thought. And so I think, frankly, that Buddhism has the most satisfying answer to that in the ripening of karma. And so then you could ask, why is this karmic seed ripening at this particular time? And then that's where it gets into the realm of Shinto-kokyu, deeply hidden, where we have to just rely on the karmic correlations that the Buddha discovered and other enlightened beings were able to see, the deep cause and effect. But there is also a very interesting answer to why in Dzogchen and Mahamudra. And since the question has come up, I will just tell you that, and it may not make so much sense right now, but I'll mention it again later, and then maybe it will make more sense at that point when we get to primordial consciousness and pristine awareness. So you can ask the question then, so when you are resting in pristine awareness, you are beyond karma. So there is no cause and effect operating while you are resting in pristine awareness or primordial consciousness. So, because for one reason, because there is no time, or it is a timeless state. It is said to be the fourth time, beyond the three times of past, present, and future. So there's no before and after for causality to act in, and for other reasons as well. So there is an interesting explanation, and then when we are resting in that state, in non-meditation really, what we are doing is watching appearances, because in Dzogchen, in resting in this state, that doesn't mean that there are no appearances. And I think it's tomorrow, we'll take a look at a citation from His Holiness the Dalai Lama in a Dzogchen text of his that explains something very, very interesting, a distinction between the New Translation and Old Translation schools. This Dzogchen coming out of the Old Translation school, and Gelugpa, for instance, being New Translation school. So a very interesting difference in the view of what is necessary for the attainment of clear light. And there's a very important distinction, but I'll leave His Holiness to tell us about that. But suffice it to say that there are appearances when you're resting in this timeless state, beyond all conceptuality. Appearances continue to arise spontaneously. And so the question then is, there again, why? Why this appearance? And the answer that is given in Dzogchen or in Mahamudra practice, but perfectly consistent with Dzogchen, is that it is compassion. And that this appearance is rising now as a display of awareness itself to pristine awareness, non-dual awareness and appearance, because this is the one to move you further along on your practice. So interesting thought of why. But very deep question. And I think that this is something for all of us to ponder. The question of why this now? Why is this showing up? Or why this individual appearance right now? And yeah, enough said about that one.
I don't understand what means the unification of stillness and movement. Does it mean that we perceive both simultaneously?
Aha, yes. Right, because so it's basically restating the premise in the conclusion. So the answer is yes. So simultaneous stillness and motion. This is slippery as experience, difficult to understand exactly what those words mean. And so that is exactly why I mentioned one thing that I believe it is not. And that is the alternation between these two experiences of, first of all, awareness with no appearances, because you're looking for appearances and they are the shy maidens. So no appearances are showing up. And then an appearance arises, and because you haven't noted it in the instant that it arises, but only after it has arisen, it has the capacity to abduct you and to take you wandering. So your practice of stillness and motion can be stillness and then motion. So the motion becoming fused with these appearances and going wandering with them. So you have lost your stillness of awareness, so that there basically is only movement of awareness and movement of appearance when your mind is wandering. So that's what I was trying to do with that, is to try to give you some cues from my own experience, because it's very basically when we get to this point, there are some words describing the practice, and then the intention is for each of us to go back to our cave and wear out cushions until we get an experiential referent of what those words mean. And so I was trying to give you a shortcut of what that is not, the alternating between stillness and then motion. And I think, so that is why I said, I think many students who have been practicing simultaneous stillness and motion for a long time are still doing that. And I hear people's comments in interviews and things about that. People, because, some of my students have been practicing this, and students of Lama Alan have been practicing this for, 7 or 8 years or so. So that's why, to me, the one experience that seems to capture this most closely that I've experienced right now is lucid dreaming. And so it basically is lucid dreaming in the waking state. And this was something that just arose to me in practice. And then I had opportunity to talk with Lama Alan after a retreat on lucid dreaming. And he said, yes, that is exactly right. And then he has mentioned it a couple of times since in teachings. So I think I'm on the right track with this. That basically, so then the experience is that there's no effort involved. So just as in a lucid dream, the appearances are arising. So there's certainly no effort involved in that. But now there's no effort in maintaining the stillness either. Because all you're doing is maintaining a point of view, which is lucidity. And this is going to become easier, I think, for you after tomorrow. Because one of the things that we will be doing tomorrow is to begin investigating the nature of these appearances that are arising. And so one of the qualities of lucid dreaming, of course, is knowing that these appearances that are arising in the dream are nothing more than dream appearances. And we no longer take them to be real. We realize that the pig flying and water running uphill are obviously just insubstantial appearances of mind and not just the way things are here in France. So that experience, if you don't have an experience of lucid dreaming, that might be, again, not so helpful because they're still just words with no experience to compare it with. But when you do have an experience of lucid dreaming, and as you progress through Shamatha, and in longer retreats also we include lucid dreaming instruction as part of our evening sessions. But as you progress through Shamatha, you just naturally become lucid in your dream state. And then so Shamatha then supports the development of lucid dreaming. And it's not, and frankly I think it is not just Shamatha, but it is specifically this practice of simultaneous stillness and motion. Because that is exactly what you're trying to do in the dream state, is to be lucid. And so this practice as a Shamatha practice supports the development of lucid dreaming. And then as soon as you have that experience of lucid dreaming, you know exactly what it feels like to rest in that lucidity than just watching appearances arise. So remember, the key instruction for experimenting with that is when you recover from your distraction, your mind has gone wandering. And now, rather than practice that four-step approach of beginning by releasing your grasp on the distracting appearance, now you don't do that. Because that would be like the excitement that you get with your first lucid dream. And you go, I'm lucid. And so you wake up. So you have lost the balance, the Shamatha balance. And so don't get too excited. Meaning that basically don't chase the distracting appearances that you were on a trip with. Don't chase them away when you become lucid again. Just let them be, because the appearances aren't the problem. And so all you do is add a touch of knowing. So now you are awake before, and this is also why it's so important of the 4 steps for when you recover previously, to recognize the difference between this feeling of lucidity and the previous moments of non-lucidity. It's very distinct, isn't it? Now, and sometimes I say to tell yourself when you recover, I'm lucid again. Is the well-being, the sukha, the sense of enjoyment. So that is a reinforcement of the lucidity. But then also you can add the phrase, this is it. So, because lucidity is also one of those terms that, what is the teacher talking about? All I hear is lucidity, lucidity, lucidity. What does it feel like? This is it. This is lucidity. So you will never be more lucid than you are right at that moment. Probably. So just recognize the difference between that moment of lucidity and the previous moments. And then when you, later in your practice of simultaneous stillness and motion, when you recover from the wandering mind, don't chase the wandering appearances away, but add the lucidity, just like seasoning a soup. And don't do it, and don't get so excited that you wake up from the dream. So then you will just continue to experience the flow of appearances. It will be like dreaming. And then you have the lucidity to go with it, which is the stillness. So then you have simultaneous stillness and motion.
You said previously that we can have the main object of focus in the center of the attention, and another one in the periphery, and also the opposite. That's what I am experimenting in my practice. However, the scientific research say that our brain can only focus on one thing and not two.
Yes.
There is some kind of oscillation.
That's right.
So how can we conciliate both? Do we speak about the same thing?
Yes. And do you need to translate the question? Science and Buddhism are actually saying the very same thing, and it's remarkable how closely they correspond with each other. So you could call this, in both Buddhism and science, you could call this the moments of mind model. And so in Buddhism, must be in the Abhidharma Kosha, that it's said that there are, in every finger snap, 64 moments of mind. So these are 64 individual ripenings of karma that produce individual moments of mind. And each of these potentially could be 64 different moments of mind, but that would be really scattered. But it's possible. So you get that point that Buddhism is talking about, that actually consciousness isn't a flow or a stream, unbroken, but that it is discrete moments of consciousness that are occurring so quickly that it seems to be flowing. And the analogy is very, very similar to film, movie film, where you have, I think it's somewhere 28 or 32, something like that, frames per second. 24, is it? Yeah, okay, so you have, say, 24, whatever the number is, it really doesn't matter. But you have a number of frames per second, so these are just a series of still photos, but they are being projected at a speed that is fast enough that the motion blurs into each other, and it appears to be motion. So it appears to be just a smooth continuum, but actually if you were to slow it down even more, then you would see individual frames of the film. And so yogis, it's said, have the capacity to, with subtle impermanence, to basically discover what Alan Wallace calls temporal vividness, temporal being related to time, that you are able to witness briefer and briefer moments of consciousness. Theoretically, you reach the point where you could see individual moments of the 64 moments in a finger snap. So that would be tremendous temporal vividness. So cognitive science, I forget exactly what the figure is. You can find this, for instance, very well described in Richard Davidson's book, the emotional brain. What's that? The emotional life of the brain. So there's a section in there on the science of that, and the neurophysiology also of why it takes a finite amount of time to get clusters of neuronal activity to combine into a single moment of cognition. And so they describe experiments then trying to find the lower limit of how many moments are possible to know. And they talk about techniques such as masking the previous moment of stimulation, etc. But it's, let's just say, somewhere around 20 milliseconds. Somewhere 20 or 40 milliseconds, I think, is possible. So you're getting down there then, let's just say if it's 20 milliseconds, that would be 50 appearances per minute. So that's remarkably close to 64 in a finger snap, isn't it? I mean, when you think about it, that this came out of, the 64 in a finger snap came out of inner science and introspection and just developing shamatha. So that's the moments of mind model. And Buddhism and science are say the same thing in that regard. And now in regard to that target, what that is describing is the difference between coarse, medium, and subtle excitation. And so with coarse excitation, you lose your chosen object altogether. With medium excitation, which you reach at the end of level 4 of Shamatha, now, as the person mentioned, in the center of the bullseye, you have an unchosen object. And in the peripheral rings of attention, you have your chosen object. So with medium excitation and unchosen object, let's just say a memory in the middle, and then in periphery is sensations of the breath. But what's happening, the reason that you can say this isn't coarse excitation, is that your attention is toggling, oscillating very, very quickly, so that it appears to be continuous, but it's not. So it's like the blurring of the motion frames of a moving picture. So it's moving back and forth, so it seems like almost there are two simultaneously, but they're not. So that is the difference between that medium and subtle excitation and single-pointedness. Because with single-pointedness, just as the term implies, there is only the bullseye in the center of the target, and nothing in the periphery that awareness is oscillating back and forth with. So they're saying the same thing. And then subtle excitation is just the opposite, where the unchosen object is in the middle. The chosen object is in the middle. The unchosen object is in the periphery, and you're toggling back and forth. So it's basically the center of the target has a louder voice or seems more predominant, but you're toggling back and forth. And so we would like, of course, our chosen object to be the more predominant one. And then we would really like for this to become single-pointed.
Could you explain how the mind and the prana are linked? Thank you.
How the mind and what?
Prana?
Prana, oh.
Linked.
Not really. So, but I can just say a few words. But yeah, I can't say that I'm an expert in that area, but I have studied yoga philosophy. And there are the koshas, the 5 koshas. Five layers, basically, like an onion. So basically, like an onion layer, and there are just these 5 layers. But the question in all of science, really, since Descartes, has been this question: if there are 2 substances in the world, mind and body, how do they possibly relate? Because only according to the laws of physics, there is the law of closed causality. So only physical things can be causes of physical things, and only mental things can be causes of mental things. So it would seem like these 2 substances of mind and body could never relate to each other. But prana is the link, actually, between mind and body. In Buddhist philosophy and Tantra, subtle body philosophy, yoga philosophy. So prana is energy. And again, the best word for it probably is energy. In Tibetan, it's lung, wind, or vayus in Sanskrit. So the winds then move throughout the body, and then the description that is probably the most important for using subtle body practice to achieve states of realization is that the winds and the mind ride in tandem. And so this is because probably the reason that prana has the capacity to do this is because, as Lama Alan points out, prana is physical, but it's not material. So a very important distinction. So some substances in the world are physical and material, like all of matter. And so all of matter is based on elementary particles. And energy is something else. And it's very entertaining sometimes to listen to Lama Alan describe how physicists describe matter and energy. if you want a good laugh, because basically they throw up their hands and say, stop asking. Because it just becomes, at the highest levels of mathematics, it just becomes abstraction. So what is so solid and concrete, the best explanation of what it is simply mathematical abstraction. But prana is like electromagnetic energy or electromagnetic radiation, in that it is able to interact with physical things, but it itself is not material. And so this is why electromagnetic radiation can pass through the earth, for instance, like neutrinos and things like that. I think. I'm not a physicist. But there are... so this is the way then that prana is said to function. It's physical so that it can interact with the physical body. And it is immaterial so that it can interact with the immaterial mind. And so it's said that the winds and prana ride in tandem. And the way that Düdjom Lingpa described that is that the mind is like a cripple, meaning somebody who is disabled and, let's say, can't walk. And that prana is like a wild stallion, a horse that has no direction and doesn't know where to go, but it has all the energy. And so when these two are linked, then, when thought gives direction and purpose to prana, then the two become a very powerful combination. Because prana and thought are always going to be linked, even when unconsciously. But when we apply intention again, that powerful intention as a mental experience to move prana with intention to particular places in the body, then the effect can be very profound. Then that can lead to states of mental experience, of realizations. So that's the best answer I can give.
How to maintain calm, pristine awareness in activity, waking state, etc., when we are not meditating out of the cushion.
Yes. The person is probably referring to that point right at the end of our morning prayers, where the pristine awareness of Padmasambhava and our own pristine awareness merge and become indistinguishable. And then the instruction is to just rest in that pristine awareness through the remainder of this session and then throughout all the sessions of the day, both on the cushion and off the cushion. So I'm assuming that's what it's referring to. So we'll get into that when we get to pristine awareness. So all of the prayers so far have been preparing, they're prayers that when you go back to them at the end of this retreat, for instance, everything will make much more sense, and you'll see how coherent all of these prayers are then. Why refuge is stated like it is, why bodhicitta is stated like it is, why the 10 limbs of the prayer of aspiration are stated like they are. All of that will make much more sense when we really go through the qualities and the nature of pristine awareness. But you don't have to wait to get to that point, because the issue basically is the same with Shamatha. Or there was a question yesterday about, or a comment really, not a question, but a comment about the more that I meditate, the more that I do retreat, the more that I don't want to go back to the world that I left behind. And so this practice of simultaneous stillness and motion is the perfect practice to take home with you. This is a very portable meditation practice. So while you are having a conversation with your boss or an employee, and maybe it's a little troublesome, can you maintain the stillness of your awareness in the face of these moving appearances, with maybe emotions arising, all kinds of importance in the interaction? Can you maintain that? Or with a family member, or anything that you're doing, interacting with a cashier at the store. Can you maintain the stillness that is observing movement? And that is our goal, to simply maintain still, spacious awareness, whatever we're doing. And even if you're doing conceptual tasks, here is something to experiment with, to see whether this is true for you or not. Remember, Gyatro Rinpoche said that, as paradoxical as it may seem, that you can maintain a non-conceptual view of the conceptual mind at work. So even if you're doing, let's say, something very conceptual, like making an argument in writing, that you're stating a thesis and then supporting it, very conceptual, making sure that all of the reasoning is airtight, or you're doing accounting, a spreadsheet or something like that, very conceptual. Can you be doing these conceptual tasks while maintaining the stillness of a non-conceptual mind? So if you become a master of this simultaneous stillness and motion, that is the potential that you could be able to do that. And so also was the question about other practice, or how to maintain pristine awareness off the cushion. Another thing that is very, very important to do off the cushion, that's not strictly an answer to the question, but basically you can be practicing Shamatha to a degree. This is after you have really had the retreats and achieved a high level of Shamatha, or perhaps Shamatha itself. Once you achieve Shamatha, then you don't need retreat anymore. You can maintain single-pointedness out in the world. But even before that, as your awareness becomes more and more still and vivid, you can maintain stillness and motion. But a practice that is really beneficial off the cushion and very easy and very natural to do is vipassana practice. And especially the kind of vipassana practices that we're going to be doing beginning tomorrow. These are natural, and they're so easy and enjoyable and very revealing. And so Shamatha, you can do a fusion, maybe not a fusion, because it could be there are a lot of distraction and a lot of stimulation. But you can always do vipassana practice off the cushion. And then pristine awareness, once you get that, that becomes even easier.
How can we eliminate hatred, la haine du monde ou dans le monde? La haine du monde, comment éliminer la haine du monde ou la haine dans le monde? Dans le sens de la question. So there are two ways to understand that. How eliminate hatred for the world or in the world that can go as far as we refuse to live on earth.
To go as far as we refuse to live on earth? Oh. Well, don't give up on earth yet. It's still the best thing that we know for human beings, anyway, for sentient beings that, so there are many planets, of course, in the world, many habitable worlds in Buddhism, and science again says probably the same thing, very likely. But how to eliminate hatred? Well, I think the important thing to recognize is that we're not going to be able to eliminate hatred in others necessarily. But what we can do, certainly, is eliminate hatred in ourselves. And then hopefully, if we are able to eliminate hatred in ourselves, then we become a model for other people, and hopefully then loving kindness spreads because of our example. So I will... Another thing that we won't have time to talk about is maybe the last day, I think, in our wrap-up. Yeah, we'll talk about how emotions are contagious. And so compassion is also contagious. And there are studies demonstrating this. And so if we develop great loving kindness, great immeasurable compassion, then this is going to be communicated to people around us, even non-verbally. Certainly by our example, but there is a non-verbal communication that occurs also. And people, one of the points of scientific research is that people, when they see acts of compassion, are much more prepared to do acts of compassion themselves. So all of us have a very important role. If hatred in the world is going to be eliminated, the place that we obviously have to start is with ourselves. And especially in, frankly, these times, when there is so much hatred that is being encouraged by politicians, for instance, for other people, for immigrants, for refugees. It's very important that we stand up and just be different. Don't allow that to influence our minds. And to be a counterexample to that hatred. So we begin with ourselves and then let it spread from there. And then, how is it then that, is it okay to hate somebody who is encouraging hate? So, for instance, there is a very powerful person in this world right now who is having a ripple effect through the world. And I think, everybody smiling probably knows who I'm talking about. And so, is it okay to hate this person? Or is that then turning us into exactly what he has become? And so the thing to keep in mind, and this is very important, and is mentioned in great detail in this book that I mentioned, a dialogue between Paul Ekman and His Holiness the Dalai Lama. 50 hours of conversation transcribed, talking about emotions and compassion. And so His Holiness points out that it is very important never to hate an evil person, somebody who is harming others. Because, this is the standard teaching also for developing compassion in the 7-step model and exchanging self and others in Lojong. You recognize that this person who is harming others or is being perhaps unkind to you is temporarily insane. And so you wouldn't think that your mother is someone to be hated because she was temporarily very angry with you. So if you think that all of these people, Donald Trump included, wants to be happy. He wants to be free from suffering. He shares that with me like I share that with all sentient beings. And still he creates the causes of his own suffering. What could be more deserving of compassion than that?
This one you already replied during this session tonight, but we can
Let's move on to a different one then. Yeah. And I think let's make this the last question for tonight.
So during the meditation practices, either on a tactile sensation or a thought, I have a feeling that I visualize everything with my mental consciousness involuntarily. Is there any antidote, any particular antidote for that?
Ah, yes. I think that is a very common experience. And since this is the last question, I'll just mention conceptuality and how unbalanced our minds are with the dominance of conceptuality. And there is some interesting scholarship recently out of Oxford University that describes how we are actually in an unprecedented time in human history with the degree to which conceptuality rules our minds. And this was not intended to be the case in the design of the brain, or you could say our minds are not naturally designed to be fully conceptual. But just to very briefly, what has made this happen is that with the Industrial Revolution beginning in about the 1850s, all of a sudden farmers moved to the towns, to the cities, to become factory workers. And now most of our population lives in cities rather than in the countryside. And so everyone is living in a world that was created by conceptuality, by the conceptual mind. Everything, all the rules from getting from this side of town to the other side of the city, all of the cars, the factories, our jobs, our entertainment, all of it is fully conceptual. And so we are just immersed in a world of conceptuality. And so we begin to relate to the whole world conceptually rather than with awareness. And so we are fully deluded because we take the conceptual appearance to be the true reality. And just one very interesting element in the research on the conceptual left hemisphere of the brain is that it is totally unaware of the existence of awareness. So this is really unaware of the existence of awareness of the right hemisphere of the brain. So this is very interesting because the conceptual mind that dominates most of our conscious thinking believes that it has the full picture and the true picture about reality because it's totally unaware of an alternative. And so it is with these practices of Dzogchen and Mahamudra in particular, where we are working directly with awareness rather than selective, exclusive, focused attention, that really is a wonderful antidote to that. So just working with awareness is a very powerful antidote to breaking through the conceptual mind. And why is that? Because we can see the lie of the conceptual mind. We can see that it isn't all that there is. How do we do that? Watching the mind of conceptuality at work from upstream. Watching the mind from outside the mind, from the point of view of substrate consciousness. So when we see that, we see exactly what the role of conceptuality is. It has a powerful role. It's very important. It is what has produced all of our culture, our art, language. It's what allows us to know the experience of the Buddha and of all of the great Mahasiddhas and Pandits, yogis, all of the awakened ones since have communicated that conceptually. And so we understand that conceptually, but we have to realize that the conceptuality is only a partial truth. And we have to use the conceptual signs to break through to non-conceptuality. And so in particular, the person mentioned the experience of the body and breath meditation, right? Wasn't it? Along with thoughts, having a conceptual experience of that as well. So this is one of the best ways to approach that is to, with this practice of bare attention. So this is exactly what the Buddha was advising Bahiya in the Sutra of Bahiya or something, I believe it is. And it is, O Bahiya, in the seen, let there be only the seen. In the heard, let there be only the heard. In the felt, let there be only the felt. And he goes on. And then he concludes with, thus you see that there is no person in the seen, there is no person in the heard, etc., etc. So it is a meditation on bare attention and dependent origination, basically, that you're not going to find an I in the perception itself. And so I think the most common experience when people are doing breath meditation to begin with is to relate to their breath and to their bodies conceptually. And so people, for instance, will have an image of their body and then feel, for instance, the location of the nostrils as like a cartoon character and having a point on the cartoon character's nose light up, for instance. This is where the breath is occurring. So we have a cartoon image of myself breathing and then a visual image of the breath entering this cartoon character's nose, etc. And so we can have an image of our body and that we're breathing with this visual image. And so a very powerful way of getting through that is to recognize that the 5 sense fields, the 5 primary consciousnesses of the senses, are non-conceptual. And mentation or mental consciousness can turn any sensory experience into a conceptual experience of the sense power. And so what we normally experience is the conceptual mind's elaboration of a sense input. And so when we go out to look at this beautiful sunset here momentarily, we can either look at the sunset with bare attention and just see color and feel some sort of rapture that comes with stable, vivid attention. Or we can just say, oh, this is a sunset in France. This is different than sunsets in Tuscany. I can tell you why. Sunsets in Tuscany are golden. I think I like the golden sunsets. That's why all these great Renaissance painters, on and on and on you go, right? Or you compare it and you say, this is the most beautiful sunset ever. I can't wait to tell so-and-so about the beautiful sunsets in France. And before you know it, the sun has gone down, and you've missed it. So bear attention. Can you relate to the breath as only tactile sensations, rather than a conceptuality? And that will be a very good start, to just notice tactile sensations as tactile sensations and nothing more. In the felt, let there be only the felt. Soha. It is a great mass of merit that you have created today. The virtue of your powerful motivation, your dedicated practice. And may that virtue ripen, not as some temporary pleasure, like a beautiful sunset, but may it ripen as ultimate benefit for all beings. May all beings come to know stillness. May all beings come to know peace. May they know a path leading to liberation and find authentic, perfect teachers to lead them along the path to the ultimate goal, perfect awakening, so that suffering is eliminated from the world forever. All by the goodness of what you have done today. May it be so.